They celebrated on my land. Not quietly, not accidentally, but with balloons, cameras, and a full crowd like they had just built something historic. I was standing there when it happened, right at the edge of the playground, watching as Linda Harper stepped forward in her bright yellow suit, smiling like she owned the place. She raised a pair of oversized scissors, the kind you only see at grand openings, and the crowd actually started clapping before she even cut the ribbon. Kids were laughing. Parents were recording on their phones. Someone behind me said, "This is exactly what this neighborhood needed." And I almost said something. Almost. Because just a few feet behind that brand new playground, behind the fresh paint, the polished benches, and the expensive equipment, was a piece of land that didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. My name was on every legal document tied to it. Every inch of that ground had been passed down to me from my father, the same man who spent years taking care of it long before this HOA ever existed. And yet, there I was, silent, watching them celebrate something they had no right to build. Now here's the part that makes this whole thing worse. This didn't happen overnight. They didn't just wake up one day and build a playground. No, this took weeks, planning, construction, money, announcements, and the entire time, I let them do it. I didn't stop the workers when they showed up. I didn't argue when they started digging into the soil. I didn't call the police when they poured concrete into land that legally belonged to me. I let them finish everything, even the grand opening, because sometimes the smartest move you can make is nothing. And what happened the very next morning? That's when everything changed. Because when the parents came back with their kids, when the same families who clapped and smiled the day before walked toward that playground again, they didn't find an open gate. They found chains, heavy industrial chains wrapped tightly around every entrance, locked, sealed, untouchable. And standing right in front of those gates was me, holding a folder, with 2 police officers right behind me. I never thought I'd be the kind of person telling a story like this. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 45, and I've lived in this neighborhood long enough to know exactly how things work around here. It's the kind of place where everything looks peaceful on the surface, but behind closed doors, there's always someone trying to push the line just a little further. In my case, that someone was the HOA, and more specifically, Linda Harper. Now, before I get into how this all started, I want to ask you something real quick. If you're watching this, I'm actually curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. I read a lot of those, and it's interesting seeing how far these kinds of stories reach. And if you've ever dealt with anything even close to this, you might want to stick around, because this one gets a little crazy. Also, if you end up enjoying the story, a quick like or subscribe really does help, but no pressure. Anyway, let me take you back to the beginning. This neighborhood used to be simple, quiet streets, familiar faces, no drama. The HOA existed, sure, but it wasn't this controlling, overreaching thing it is now. People followed basic rules, paid their dues, and went about their lives. That changed when Linda Harper became president. At first, she came off as organized, professional, the kind of person who said all the right things about improving the community and bringing people together. But it didn't take long to see what she was really doing. Rules started getting stricter. Fines started appearing for things nobody used to care about. People were getting warnings for minor issues, trash bins left out too long, paint shades being slightly off, decorations that didn't match her idea of community standards. And the worst part? Most people just went along with it, because fighting the HOA meant time, money, and stress. It was easier to just comply. I wasn't interested in fighting either, but I also wasn't going to let someone quietly take something that didn't belong to them. The land behind my house wasn't just an empty lot. It meant something. My father bought it decades ago, back when this entire area was still developing. Before the HOA, before the rules, before people like Linda had any say in what happened here. I still remember being a kid, walking that land with him early in the morning. He used to carry this old toolbox around, fixing small things that didn't even need fixing. One time I asked him why he cared so much about a piece of land that most people would ignore. He looked at me and said, "Because one day, it'll be yours. And when that happens, it's your job to protect it." After he passed, everything transferred to me legally. No disputes, no shared ownership, just mine. Which is why what happened next didn't make any sense. The first time Linda brought it up, she acted like it was nothing. She showed up at my door one afternoon, holding a clipboard, wearing that same polished smile she always had in public. "Marcus," she said casually, "We've been reviewing some of the community zoning, and it looks like a portion of your back lot may actually fall under shared space." I didn't react right away. I just looked at her, because I already knew that wasn't true. "I've got the original documents," I told her calmly. "It's private property." Her smile didn't fade, not even a little. "Of course," she said, "but sometimes older records don't reflect updated zoning changes. The board will take a closer look." And just like that, she left. No argument, no pressure, just a statement, planted like a seed. A few days later, I got the letter. Official HOA notice. According to their updated records, a section of my land was now designated as community space. I read it once, then again, and then I did something most people wouldn't expect. I didn't respond. No calls, no emails, no complaints. I just let it sit, because something about the way this was happening felt planned, too smooth, too confident, and I wanted to see how far they'd go. A week later, I got my answer. Bright orange markers appeared across my land, perfectly spaced, like someone had already decided exactly where everything would go. The next morning, construction trucks showed up. Workers stepped out like this was just another job. No hesitation, no permission. They started measuring, digging, setting up equipment. I watched all of it from my window. One of the workers even looked over at me at one point, probably expecting me to come outside and say something. I didn't. I just stood there for a moment, then turned around and walked away. That same afternoon, Linda sent out a neighborhood-wide email. "Exciting news! The HOA is proud to announce the development of a brand new community playground." I read that line twice, then I smiled, because right there, I knew exactly what she was doing. And more importantly, I knew exactly how this was going to end. So while they were out there building, I was doing something else entirely, something they never saw coming. I started documenting everything. Every truck that entered, every worker on site, every conversation I could legally record. Hidden cameras went up in places they wouldn't notice, angles they wouldn't think to check. Audio picked up things they assumed were private. And while all that was happening, I pulled out every document tied to that land. Original deeds, property maps, transfer records, everything my father left behind. And then, I found something that changed everything. Because buried inside the HOA's updated files was a version of the property map that didn't match mine. Not slightly different, completely altered. Boundary lines shifted, measurements changed, signatures that looked off. Too clean, too convenient. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a zoning update. This was intentional. And suddenly, this wasn't about stopping them anymore. It was about letting them finish. Because if I shut it down early, they'd deny it, blame confusion, quietly fix the paperwork and move on. But if I let them build everything, spend all that money, invite the entire neighborhood to celebrate it, then took it away, there'd be no covering it up, no excuses, no way out. So I stayed quiet, day after day, as my land turned into their project. And by the time they finally cut that ribbon, everything I needed was already in place. All I had to do was wait for the next morning. The morning after the grand opening, the neighborhood woke up excited. You could feel it in the air. Parents had already made plans. Kids were talking about it non-stop. For them, it wasn't just a playground. It was something new, something fun, something that made this place feel more complete. And that's exactly why I chose that morning. Not the night before, not during construction, not even during the ribbon cutting. I waited until everyone believed it was theirs, because taking something away only hurts when people think they actually own it. I got up early that day, earlier than usual. The sun was barely up, casting that soft orange light across the neighborhood. For a moment, everything looked calm, peaceful, almost like nothing was about to happen. I walked straight to the back of my property where the playground stood, perfectly built, clean, untouched since the event the day before. Bright slides, fresh paint, swings that hadn't even been used yet. It looked exactly how Linda wanted it to look. Perfect. I stood there for a few seconds, just taking it in. Then I got to work. The chains weren't small. I didn't go with anything cheap or temporary. I made sure of that. Thick, industrial-grade steel chains. The kind you don't just cut through without serious effort. Each entrance gate got wrapped twice, locked tight. No gaps, no weak points. I moved methodically, one gate at a time. No rush, no hesitation. By the time I finished the last lock, the sun had fully risen, right on schedule, because about 10 minutes later, the first family showed up. It was a young couple with their daughter, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She ran ahead of them, excited, probably thinking she'd be the first one there. And then she stopped, right at the entrance. "Mom?" she said, confused. Her parents caught up a few seconds later, and I could see the shift in their expressions almost instantly. Confusion first, then frustration. "What is this?" the father muttered, stepping closer to the gate. That's when he noticed me, standing a few feet away, calm, still, watching. "Hey!" he called out. "Do you know what's going on here?" I walked toward them slowly, holding the folder in my hand. "Yeah," I said, "I do." Before I could say anything else, more people started arriving. Another family, then another. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed near the entrance. Kids whispering, parents trying to figure out what was happening, some already pulling out their phones. And right on time, Linda showed up. You could always tell when she was approaching, not just because of the way she dressed, but because of the way people reacted. Conversations shifted, attention moved. She walked toward the playground with that same confident stride, sunglasses on, yellow suit perfectly pressed, like she was about to host another event. "Good morning, everyone," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I hope you're all enjoying the new—" She stopped mid-sentence, because she finally saw the chains. Her smile didn't disappear immediately, it just paused, like her brain needed a second to process what she was looking at. "What is this?" she asked, her tone changing just slightly. I stepped forward. "This," I said calmly, "is a locked gate." A few people in the crowd let out small laughs, thinking maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding. Linda didn't laugh. She took off her sunglasses slowly, staring directly at me now. "Marcus," she said, her voice tighter than before. "Why are these gates locked?" I held up the folder. "Because this is private property." The crowd went quiet. Not completely silent, but that kind of quiet where people start paying very close attention. Linda let out a short, controlled laugh. "That's not correct," she said. "This area was approved by the HOA board as shared community space." I nodded slightly. "Yeah," I said. "I saw that document." There was a brief pause. Then I added, "It's fake." That's when the energy shifted. You could feel it. People started looking at each other, parents whispering. Someone in the back said, "Wait, what?" Linda's expression hardened. "Excuse me?" she said. Before I could respond, 2 police officers walked up behind me, right on time. I didn't even turn around. I already knew they were there, but the crowd noticed immediately, and so did Linda. "Officers," she said quickly, stepping forward, trying to regain control. "There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding. This man has locked access to a community space." One of the officers raised his hand slightly. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we're here because of a property dispute." Then he looked at me. "Sir, is this your land?" I handed him the folder. "Yes," I said. "All documentation is in there. Original deed, property maps, legal transfers. It's been in my family for decades." He took the folder, flipping through the pages. The second officer stepped closer to the gate, inspecting the area. Linda tried to interrupt again. "This has already been reviewed by the HOA," she said. "We have updated zoning records. Do you have those records with you?" the officer asked. Linda hesitated. "Just for a second. Not on me," she admitted. That was enough. The officer nodded slightly, continuing to look through my documents. Meanwhile, the crowd was starting to turn. "What do you mean private property?" one parent asked. "You guys built this without checking?" another added. "I thought this was approved." The questions weren't directed at me anymore. They were directed at Linda, and she could feel it. "Everyone just relax," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is just a temporary issue. We'll have this sorted out quickly." I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "It's already sorted." She looked at me, clearly irritated now. "Marcus, you're overreacting. Even if there's a small discrepancy, this playground was built for the community, on my land." I cut in. Silence. Then I added, "without permission." The officer closed the folder. "Based on these documents," he said, "this does appear to be private property." Linda's face changed, not dramatically, but enough. That confident, controlled expression, it started to crack. "That's not possible," she said. "We verified everything." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Yeah," I said, "about that." I tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward the officer. A video started playing. It was clear, clean, no audio distortion. Linda's voice. "Just adjust the boundary lines slightly. No one's going to question it." The officer's expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened. I looked back at Linda. "This is where things get serious," I said quietly. The crowd had gone completely silent now. No whispers, no movement, just people watching, waiting. And for the first time since this started, Linda didn't have anything to say, because she finally realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something she could talk her way out of. This was something else entirely, and it was only just beginning. For a few seconds after the video stopped, nobody said anything. Not the parents, not the officers, not even Linda. The only sound was the faint creak of one of the swings moving slightly in the morning breeze. This brand new playground, sitting there completely untouched, suddenly feeling a lot less like a community project and a lot more like a mistake, a very expensive one. Linda was the first to recover, or at least she tried to. "That video proves nothing," she said quickly, her voice sharper now, the fake calm starting to slip. "That could be taken out of context. We were discussing multiple properties." "No," I said, cutting her off. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I just said it, calmly. And somehow, that made it hit harder. That's you," I continued, "talking about my land, adjusting boundary lines, without authorization." One of the officers glanced at me, then back at Linda. "Ma'am," he said, "do you have any documentation to support your claim that this is shared property?" Linda opened her mouth, then paused, just for a second, but it was enough. "The records are with the HOA, she said finally. "I can have them sent over." The officer nodded slightly. "Until then, we have to go by what's currently verified," he replied, holding up the folder I had given him. "And according to these documents, this is private property." That's when the murmurs started again. But this time, they weren't confused. They were frustrated. "You mean they built this without actually owning the land?" someone said. "That's not legal, right? What happens now?" A woman near the front looked directly at Linda. "My kids were here yesterday. You told us this was approved." Linda turned toward her, forcing a smile that didn't quite land this time. "It was approved," she insisted. "There's clearly been some kind of clerical error." "A clerical error doesn't move property lines," I said. That one landed. You could see it in the way people reacted, heads turning, expressions shifting, because deep down, everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. And that's when things really started to turn. One of the parents stepped forward, arms crossed. "So what are you saying?" he asked, looking at Linda. "You guys just decided to take someone's land?" "No," she snapped, a little too quickly. "That's not what I'm saying at all." "Then what are you saying?" someone else added. Now the pressure was on her. Not from me, from them. And that's exactly how I wanted it. Because it's one thing to argue with a homeowner. It's another thing entirely to explain yourself to an entire neighborhood. Linda adjusted her posture, trying to regain control. "Everyone just needs to calm down," she said, her tone shifting into that familiar authority voice she used in HOA meetings. "We will review the situation internally and provide an update. For now, this area will remain closed until we resolve." "Closed?" a parent interrupted. "You just opened it yesterday." "And now it's locked," I said. All eyes went back to me. I could feel it, the shift in focus, the moment where people stopped seeing me as the guy causing a problem and started seeing me as the one holding the answers. I held up the folder again. "This land has always been private," I said. "Nothing changed. The only difference is they built something on it without permission." A man in the back shook his head. "That doesn't make any sense. Don't you need permits for something like this?" "Permits, approvals, legal verification," I replied. "Yeah, you do." The silence that followed that was heavier, because now people weren't just confused, they were connecting the dots. And once that starts happening, it's hard to stop. Linda noticed it too. "Okay," she said, her voice tighter now. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Marcus, if you have concerns, we can discuss this privately. There's no need to make this into a public issue." "It became public when you invited the entire neighborhood to a grand opening," I said. That hit hard. A few people in the crowd nodded immediately. Someone even said, "He's right." And just like that, the balance shifted even more. Linda looked around, realizing she was losing control of the room. So she changed tactics. "Fine," she said, her tone colder now. "Let's assume for a moment that there's a dispute over the land. That still doesn't give you the right to block access like this. This was built for the community. I tilted my head slightly. On my property. She didn't respond, because there wasn't a response to that. One of the officers stepped forward again. "Sir," he said to me, "do you intend to keep this area secured?" "Yes," I replied. "Until this is resolved legally." He nodded. "That's within your rights as the property owner." That was the moment. The exact moment everything changed. Because hearing it from me was one thing. Hearing it from a police officer, that made it real. And the crowd reacted instantly. So it is his land? Then why did the HOA even build this? This is unbelievable. The frustration wasn't quiet anymore. It was growing. And it wasn't pointed at me. Linda tried one more time. "This is not over," she said, looking directly at me now. "The HOA will be reviewing all legal options. You can't just—" "I already have," I said. She stopped. "What?" I reached into the folder and pulled out a single document, then handed it to the officer. He read it quickly, then looked back at me. "This is a notice of intent to file," he asked. I nodded. "Against the HOA," I said, "for unauthorized use of private property, fraudulent documentation, and damages." The crowd reacted again, louder this time. "Wait, he's suing them? For how much?" Linda's face went completely still. "Marcus," she said slowly, "you don't need to escalate this." I looked at her for a moment, then said, "You already did." And that was the truth. She escalated it the moment she decided to fake documents, the moment she thought no one would question her, the moment she believed she could take something, just because she had the title of president. But titles don't mean much when the facts don't back you up. And right now, the facts were stacked against her. The officer handed the document back to me. "If this proceeds legally," he said, "you'll want to make sure all evidence is preserved." I gave a small nod. Already handled. Because that's the part Linda still didn't fully understand. This wasn't something I put together overnight. This wasn't reaction. This was planning. Weeks of it. Every conversation recorded. Every action documented. Every step calculated. I didn't just let them build a playground. I let them build a case against themselves. And now, all of it was about to come down on them at once. Linda looked around one last time. At the crowd, at the locked gates, at the officers, and then back at me. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't look in control. She looked cornered, and we were still only at the beginning, because what she didn't know yet was just how much this was going to cost her. By noon, the playground didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like a scene everyone wanted to leave, but nobody could stop watching. People were still gathered near the gates, talking in low voices, replaying what had happened like they were trying to make it make sense. Kids had stopped playing around completely. Some were sitting on curbs, confused why something they were excited about yesterday suddenly felt off. And Linda? She was still there, not standing as confidently as before, not speaking as loudly, just pacing near the edge of the crowd, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in short, angry bursts like she was trying to fix something that was already broken. I stayed where I was, near the main gate, calm, observing. Because the truth was, the situation wasn't going to be fixed with phone calls anymore. It was already past that point. I could see 2 HOA board members arriving about 20 minutes later. Their car pulled up fast, almost aggressively, like they already knew this wasn't a normal complaint situation. One of them stepped out immediately, an older man in a gray polo, clearly trying to look composed but failing slightly in the way he scanned the locked gates. The second one followed behind him, holding a tablet, already scrolling through something like they were trying to catch up in real time. Linda rushed toward them the moment she saw them. "Finally," she said quickly, "you need to handle this immediately. He's locked access to a community facility and is making false claims about ownership." The older man didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, then at the gates, then at the police officers still standing nearby. That pause said more than anything Linda was saying. "What's going on?" he asked carefully. I stepped forward slightly, holding the folder again. "This is private property," I said. "Always has been." Linda immediately interrupted. "That is not true. We approved this area as shared land based on updated zoning records." The second board member raised a hand slightly. "Linda," he said, quieter now, "let us see the documents." She hesitated, just for a moment, then forced a smile. "Of course," she said, and pulled up something on her phone. But I already knew what she was about to show them. And so did she. Because it wasn't the original paperwork. It was the altered version. The one with shifted boundary lines. The one that looked official at first glance, until you actually compared it to the real records. The older board member took her phone and studied it closely, then frowned. "This doesn't match the county registry," he said. Linda's smile dropped slightly. "That's impossible," she said quickly. "We filed everything through proper channels." The second member looked at me. "Do you have your version?" I nodded and handed over the folder. He went through it slowly this time. Not rushed, not casual. Every page seemed to matter more than the last. And the longer he looked, the quieter he became. Eventually, he closed it and looked at Linda. "This is a direct contradiction," he said. Linda's voice rose slightly. "No, it's not. There must be an administrative error somewhere. We've already invested in this project. The community." "The community?" I interrupted again. Everyone turned toward me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You built on land you didn't verify," I said. "You invited people to celebrate something you didn't legally own. And now you're calling it a community project?" Silence. That word hit differently now, because it wasn't just about property anymore. It was about trust, and that was already breaking down in front of everyone. A woman from the crowd stepped forward. "My kids were playing here yesterday," she said, looking between Linda and the board members. "You told us it was approved, was it not?" The older board member looked uncomfortable. "We're still reviewing the documentation," he said carefully. "That's not an answer," someone else called out. More voices joined in now. "Did you guys mess this up? Who approved this? Are we going to get fined for this later?" The pressure shifted again, not toward me, toward them. Linda turned sharply toward the crowd. "Everyone needs to calm down," she said, her voice tight now. "This is a minor legal misunderstanding. It will be resolved internally." "It's not minor," I said quietly, and that stopped her mid-sentence. I continued. "You changed property boundaries in your documents. You approved construction on land you didn't verify, and you hosted a public event on it." I looked at the board members. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's negligence at best." The second board member looked down at his tablet, clearly uncomfortable now. "We were provided updated survey data," he said. "From who?" I asked. He paused. That pause told me everything. Linda stepped forward quickly. "That's irrelevant right now," she said. "What matters is resolving this without damaging the community's reputation." I almost laughed. Almost. "Community reputation," I repeated. I looked around, at the locked gates, at the confused parents, at the officers still standing quietly, watching everything unfold, and then back at her. "You already did that yourself." That's when the officer finally stepped forward again. "We're going to need a formal statement from the HOA," he said, "and we'll be documenting everything on site until this is resolved." Linda turned toward him immediately. "Are you saying we can't access the playground?" "Until ownership is verified," he replied calmly. "Access remains restricted." That was the moment things fully shifted, because up until now, people still thought this might get fixed quickly. But hearing that, from law enforcement, that changed everything. A few parents started pulling their kids back. Others looked annoyed now, not confused, not curious, but actually upset. One man shook his head. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "We were told this was handled." Another added, "So who's responsible for this mess?" And that question hung in the air, because now everyone was looking for accountability. Linda looked at me again, and for the first time, there was no confidence in her expression, just frustration, and something underneath it, something closer to fear. "This isn't over," she said quietly. I nodded slightly. "I know," I said, because I wasn't done yet, not even close. This wasn't just about locking a gate, it was about what came next. And what came next was going to cost her a lot more than pride. It was going to cost her control. By the next morning, the neighborhood wasn't talking about the playground anymore. They were talking about Linda. And more importantly, they were talking about the documents. Because once people start questioning authority in a place like this, it spreads faster than anything else. One conversation turns into 10. 10 turns into everyone. I could feel it when I stepped outside. People weren't looking at me the same way anymore. It wasn't confusion now. It was understanding. And that understanding was shifting direction, away from me, toward her. The HOA building was already active when I arrived later that morning. Cars parked unevenly outside, doors opening and closing fast, voices coming through the glass like something inside was unraveling. I didn't rush. I never rushed. I walked in like I already knew exactly what I was going to find. Inside the meeting room, the atmosphere was different than before. No polished confidence, no rehearsed smiles, just tension. Linda was standing near the front, arms crossed tightly, speaking to two board members in low, sharp tones. The same yellow suit from yesterday, now looking less like authority and more like someone trying to hold on to control that was already slipping. When she saw me enter, she stopped talking, just for a second, then continued like I wasn't there. That told me everything I needed to know. She didn't want me in the room, but I was already part of it. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Marcus," he said carefully. "We were just discussing the situation." I nodded slightly. I assumed. Linda turned toward me immediately. "This doesn't need to be escalated further," she said. "We can resolve this privately. There's no reason to involve outside pressure or legal escalation when this is clearly a misunderstanding." I looked at her for a moment, then at the others, and then I said it simply. "It's not a misunderstanding." Silence again. That word was starting to follow this entire situation, because the more people looked at it, the less it looked like confusion, and the more it looked intentional. One of the board members shifted in his seat. "We need clarity," he said. "The county registry shows one thing, the HOA records show another, and the construction already happened. We need to know how this discrepancy occurred." Linda immediately responded. "I already explained," she said quickly. "There must have been outdated survey data. These things happen when older property lines aren't updated properly." I stepped forward slightly. "And who provided that data?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's not relevant," she said. "It is," I replied. That made her pause again. And this time, she didn't have a quick answer ready, because the truth was starting to press against her version of events. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then one of the board members placed a printed sheet on the table. "This was submitted during the approval process," he said. I glanced at it, and I already knew what it was before I even picked it up. The altered map. The same one I had seen before. The same one that didn't match official records. Linda leaned forward immediately. "Yes," she said quickly. "That's the updated version we worked from." I picked it up slowly, looked at it, then said, "This isn't updated. This is altered." That word landed hard. Even the board members looked uncomfortable now. Linda's voice sharpened. "That's a serious accusation." I nodded. "I know." Then I reached into my folder and placed my version on the table. No drama, no build-up, just facts. "This is the original deed," I said, "filed with the county, never changed, never disputed, never modified." I looked up at her. "And this," I added, "is what you used to build on my land." The room went still, completely still this time. No side conversations, no shifting chairs, no interruptions, just silence. Because now there were two documents sitting side by side, and only one of them could be real. One of the board members leaned forward, comparing them carefully. The longer he looked, the more his expression changed. "This signature doesn't match county records," he said quietly. Linda turned toward him immediately. "What are you talking about? It's the same filing system we always use." "It doesn't match," he repeated. The second board member took the papers now, studying them closer, then looked at her. "Linda," he said slowly, "did you authorize changes to the property map without county verification?" Her posture changed slightly. Not much, but enough. "I authorized review of community boundaries," she said carefully, "based on updated information provided to the board." "From who?" I asked again. This time, she didn't respond immediately. That silence was louder than anything else she had said so far. The first board member looked up. "We may need to pause all HOA operations related to this project," he said. That hit her instantly. "What?" she snapped. "You can't just pause everything over a paperwork issue." "This isn't just paperwork," he replied. "If those documents are incorrect, then the construction itself is unauthorized." And there it was. The line she had been avoiding all along. Unauthorized. Not disputed. Not unclear. Unauthorized. Linda looked around the room now, like she was trying to find support from someone, anyone, who would step in and back her up. But nobody did. Not anymore. Because the situation had shifted completely. One of the board members stood up. "We need to contact legal counsel immediately," he said, "and notify the county about potential documentation issues." Linda's voice rose again. "This is unnecessary escalation." But no one responded this time, not even the board members, because the decision wasn't hers anymore. It hadn't been for a while. I stayed quiet as they continued discussing procedures, legal steps, and formal review processes, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't need to say anything. The damage wasn't theoretical anymore. It was documented, it was visible, and it was spreading. By the time I left the building, I could already see 2 more HOA members outside, talking to neighbors. Phones were out. Conversations were happening in clusters. The story wasn't controlled anymore. It was public. And Linda knew it too. Because as I stepped out into the parking lot, I saw her watching me through the window. No speech, no authority, just silence. And for the first time since this began, she didn't look like the one in control. She looked like the one waiting for the next move, and I had already made it. The call came in just after sunrise. I didn't even need to look at the screen to know what it was about. When a situation like this reaches a certain point, it stops being about meetings, arguments, or HOA board discussions. It becomes official. And once it becomes official, everything slows down in a very specific way. Not calmer, just more serious. I answered on the second ring. There was a pause on the other end before a voice finally spoke. "Mr. Reed, this is regarding the property dispute involving the HOA and the playground development." "Yeah," I said calmly. "I figured." Another pause. "We're requesting your presence at the county office today for verification of documentation and formal statement." I glanced out the window. The playground was visible from my house. Still locked. Still untouched since the day everything changed. "All right," I said. "I'll be there." No hesitation, no emotion, just confirmation, because I already knew this moment was coming. By the time I arrived at the county office, the energy inside was different from the HOA building. This wasn't local politics anymore. This wasn't neighborhood tension. This was documentation, legality, verification. The kind of place where emotions don't matter, only records do. I was led into a small conference room where 2 county officials were already seated. Folders stacked neatly in front of them, a laptop open, screens showing scanned property maps and legal filings. And then there was Linda, sitting across the table, still wearing that yellow suit. But now it didn't look powerful anymore. It looked loud. Like she was trying too hard to hold on to something that had already slipped away. She didn't look at me when I sat down. Not immediately. One of the officials cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he said. "We are here to determine the validity of property claims related to the playground development constructed by the HOA." He turned toward Linda first. "Ma'am, do you confirm that the HOA authorized construction on the land in question?" Linda straightened slightly. "Yes," she said quickly, "based on updated survey data provided to the board." The official nodded once. "Do you have the original source of that survey data?" A pause. Just a small one, but I noticed it. Linda shifted in her seat. "The data was provided through internal review channels," she said. "It was processed through standard HOA procedures." The official didn't react. He just wrote something down, then turned to me. "Mr. Reed, please confirm your ownership claim." I opened my folder, but this time, I didn't rush. I placed every document down slowly, one by one. Deed records, county filings, historical property maps, transfer documentation from my father's estate, all of it clean, all of it consistent, all of it official. "This land has been in my family for decades," I said. "There has never been any shared designation, no zoning transfer. No legal amendment." I looked up, and no permission was ever granted for construction. The room went quiet, not tense, just focused. The official leaned forward, reviewing the documents carefully. His expression didn't change much, but I could tell when something clicked, because that's how it works in rooms like this. There's a moment when uncertainty disappears, and clarity takes its place. He turned to his colleague, pointing at the screen. "These records match county archives exactly," he said. Then he looked at Linda. "That means the submitted HOA map does not align with official property data." Linda immediately leaned forward. "That cannot be correct," she said firmly. "We relied on documentation provided to us by verified sources." "Which sources?" the official asked again. This time, the silence was longer. She looked at the table, then back up, then didn't answer. That was the first real crack. Not anger, not denial, just hesitation. And in situations like this, hesitation says more than words ever could. The official turned back to me. "Mr. Reed," he said, "did you at any point authorize construction or modification of your property for public or community use?" "No," I said. Simple, direct, final. Another pause. Then the second official spoke. "Based on current verification, construction appears to have taken place on privately owned land without authorization." That sentence changed everything, because it wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't debate. It was confirmation. Linda's posture shifted instantly. "No," she said quickly. "That's not accurate. We acted in good faith based on the information we had." "Good faith doesn't override property law," the first official interrupted. Silence again. But this time it wasn't just in the room. It felt heavier, finaler, like something had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The official closed the folder in front of him. "Given the findings," he said, "this will be escalated for formal investigation regarding document discrepancies and unauthorized land use." Linda's voice sharpened immediately. "This is a community project. You can't just— It was built on private property," he said calmly, and that stopped her. Not because she agreed, but because there was nothing left to argue against. I watched her for a moment. For the first time, she didn't look like someone trying to win. She looked like someone realizing the rules she had been relying on didn't apply anymore. The officials began discussing next steps: legal review, documentation review, official notices. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to, because this part wasn't about speaking anymore. It was about consequences unfolding the way they were supposed to. When I finally stood up to leave, Linda spoke quietly for the first time in a while. "This isn't over," she said. I stopped at the door, turned slightly, and replied, "It already is." Not loudly, not aggressively, just factually. And then I walked out. Outside, the air felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because something had shifted, quietly, irreversibly. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A message from one of the HOA board members. "Emergency meeting tonight." I stared at it for a moment, then slipped the phone back into my pocket, because I already knew what that meeting was going to be about. And more importantly, I already knew what the outcome would be. They just hadn't realized it yet, but the structure they trusted was already starting to collapse from underneath them. And Linda? She was standing right at the center of it. The emergency HOA meeting didn't feel like a meeting anymore. It felt like a breakdown. By the time I arrived, the parking lot was already full. Too full. Cars lined up unevenly. People standing outside talking in tense groups before even stepping inside. Nobody was smiling. Nobody looked relaxed. Word travels fast in places like this, but panic travels faster. And right now, there was a lot of both. Inside the meeting room, the energy was completely different from the earlier HOA meetings I'd seen. No rehearsed speeches, no confident introductions, just noise, people talking over each other, chairs scraping, phones buzzing non-stop on the table. And at the front, Linda, still in that same yellow suit, but now it looked like she hadn't changed clothes since everything started falling apart. Wrinkled slightly, less sharp, less controlled, like she was holding on to her position more out of habit than authority. The moment I walked in, a few heads turned. The room didn't go quiet, it just shifted. Because now everyone knew why I was there. One of the board members raised his hand. "Let's begin," he said, tired already. "We've received official notification from county authorities regarding a preliminary investigation into property documentation irregularities." That word again. Irregularities. Not accusation, not assumption. Confirmation in slow motion. Linda leaned forward immediately. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said quickly. We acted on the best information available at the time. Any discrepancies can be corrected internally without escalating this further. A man near the back laughed under his breath. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. Corrected? He repeated. You mean like undoing a playground that doesn't belong to us? That got more reactions, murmurs, head turns, uneasy shifting. Linda's voice tightened. This is still a community asset, she said. Regardless of technical mapping issues, the intention was always... Intention doesn't matter in court, I said quietly. Everyone turned toward me. I hadn't planned to speak yet, but sometimes you don't need a dramatic entrance. You just need timing. Linda looked at me sharply. You've already involved outside authorities, she said. You've escalated this beyond what was necessary. I nodded slightly. Yeah, I said, because it was already beyond what was legal. That line changed the room again. You could feel it. People were no longer debating opinions. They were aligning with facts. One of the board members cleared his throat. We need to address the financial exposure, he said. Construction costs, vendor contracts, public event expenses. Another member cut in immediately. And potential legal liability. That word made the room tense again. Liability. Because now it wasn't just about who was right. It was about who was responsible. Linda stood up slightly. Let me be clear, she said. I did not personally alter any official land records. Everything was done through standard board procedures and based on information provided to us. That's the problem, I said. She turned toward me immediately. What? I looked at her for a moment, calm, unshaken. The information you relied on was incorrect, I said, and you approved construction anyway. A pause. Then I added, that's negligence. The room went quieter, because that word carried weight, not emotional weight, legal weight. One of the board members rubbed his forehead. This is getting worse, he muttered. Another leaned forward. We need to consider dissolving all current actions related to the playground immediately, he said. Before this expands further. Linda reacted instantly. No, she said sharply. We cannot undo this publicly. It will damage the HOA's reputation permanently. Someone from the side spoke up. It's already damaged. That hit harder than anything else in the room so far. Because it was true, and nobody could argue with it. Linda looked around now, clearly realizing she was losing the room. Not slowly anymore, not gradually, completely. This is being handled emotionally, she said, trying to regain control. We need to approach this rationally. Rationally? I interrupted. She stopped. I stepped forward slightly. You built on land you didn't verify, I said. You used altered documents to justify it. You invited the entire neighborhood to celebrate it. I paused. And now you're calling consequences emotional? Silence. No interruptions this time. No pushback. Just listening. Because the pattern had changed. Earlier, people were reacting to confusion. Now they were reacting to clarity. One of the board members finally spoke again. We're receiving direct communication from the county legal office, he said, looking down at his phone. They're requesting full suspension of all related HOA operations, pending investigation. That sentence hit like a shutdown switch. Suspension. Not discussion. Not warning. Suspension. Linda froze slightly. No, she said quietly. That's not necessary. But nobody responded. Because it wasn't a vote anymore. It was instruction. Another board member leaned back in his chair. This means we can't manage the playground at all, he said. We can't maintain it, modify it, or operate it until cleared. A pause. Then someone added, so it just stays locked? All eyes shifted toward me. I didn't answer immediately, because I already knew the answer, but hearing it out loud mattered more. Yes, I said finally. Linda's expression changed. Not anger this time, not confidence, something closer to disbelief. So you're just going to keep it closed? She asked. I looked at her. No, I said. A pause. Then I continued. I'm going to keep it closed until everything is resolved properly. That distinction mattered, because it wasn't emotional anymore. It wasn't personal. It was procedural, and procedures don't bend for reputations. The room stayed quiet after that. Not tense, not chaotic, just settled, like something had finally reached its final shape. Linda slowly sat back down. For the first time since this started, she didn't argue, didn't interrupt, didn't correct anyone. She just stared at the table in front of her, and I could tell she finally understood something important. This wasn't going to be fixed with meetings, or explanations, or control, because control had already left the room, and it wasn't coming back. The morning everything ended, the neighborhood was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, that different kind of quiet. The kind that happens after everyone has already talked, argued, speculated, and finally run out of things to say. I stood at the edge of the playground again, same place where it all began. Same swings, same slides, same bright colors that now felt completely disconnected from the situation they were part of. But this time, there were no crowds, no cameras, no grand opening energy, just me, and a sealed entrance. The county order had come in overnight. Formal notice, clear language, no ambiguity. The playground was officially under legal review due to property dispute and documentation irregularities. No access permitted until resolution. No maintenance, no operation. In simple terms, it was frozen, and so was everything else around it. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, controlled. I didn't turn right away, because I already knew who it was. Linda Harper stopped a few feet away. No yellow suit today, no polished smile, just a plain jacket, hair slightly disorganized, like she hadn't slept properly in days. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The swings moved slightly in the wind again. That same sound, the one that used to feel innocent. Now it just felt empty. "You got what you wanted," she said finally. I didn't respond immediately, because that wasn't true. Not really. When I finally spoke, I kept my voice calm. "No," I said. "I got what was legally correct." She let out a short breath through her nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. "Do you know what this has done?" she asked. "The board is under investigation. My name is attached to all of it now." I looked at her then. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just understanding. "That's because your decisions are attached to it," I said. Silence. A long one. She looked toward the playground. "I thought it was community land," she said quietly. That line would have sounded better earlier, at the beginning, but now it didn't hold the same weight, because too many documents had already been reviewed, too many facts already confirmed. I nodded slightly. "I know what you thought," I said. "That's not the same as what was true." She didn't respond, just stood there, staring at the locked gates. A few seconds passed. Then she said something softer. I didn't think it would go this far. That was the first honest thing she'd said since this started. And it didn't change anything, but it explained a lot. I exhaled slowly. "Most people don't," I said. Another pause. Then I added, "That's usually how it starts." She looked at me then, not as an opponent, not as someone she was trying to outmaneuver, just tired. "What happens now?" she asked. I glanced at the playground again, at the chains, at the locks, at the structure that had caused all of this. "Now?" I said. "Now it goes through legal process, county review, documentation validation, whatever comes next." A beat. "And the HOA?" she asked. I shrugged slightly. "That's not really up to me anymore." That was the truth. And for the first time in this entire situation, it felt like the first honest boundary anyone had acknowledged. Linda nodded slowly, almost like she was accepting something she had resisted for too long. Then she spoke again. "I never meant to take your land." I turned toward her fully now. "I know," I said. That surprised her. I continued. "But intention doesn't undo impact." Silence again. Longer this time. She looked away first. "I should have checked the records," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied. No anger in my voice, no satisfaction either, just finality. A few seconds passed, then she took a step back. "I'll submit my statement," she said, "to the county and the board." I nodded once. "Good." She hesitated like she wanted to say something else, but nothing came. So she just turned and walked away. No dramatic exit, no final confrontation, just distance growing until she was gone. I stayed there for a while after that, looking at the playground, at the land my father once told me to protect. I thought about that a lot in that moment. Not revenge, not victory, just him. And what he meant when he said land isn't just something you own, it's something you protect. Behind me, I heard the wind move through the trees again. The chains on the gate shifted slightly, and for the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something anymore. It was already done. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. And sometimes, that's the part people never see coming.